We're given f of x equals x to the n, where n is odd. So for this one, if you don't know the general formula and what the result is, you can pick your favorite odd number. And not to make it too complicated, we're gonna pick n equals 1. Okay, so f of x is just x to the first power. Okay, so if I plug in x equals 1, I get 1. If I plug in x equals negative 1, I get negative 1. So to summarize, if I have a positive number, raise it to an odd power, it's going to be positive. Because really what you're doing is you're multiplying a positive number an odd number of times. So like you multiply an odd number 3 times or 5 times or 7 times. You're multiplying all odd numbers, so no matter how many times you multiply by itself, it's always going to be positive. Whereas if it's negative, if you have a negative number, it's an odd number, this is going to be negative. So you can think of if the exponent is 3 and you have negative 1 inside, it's negative 1 times negative 1 times negative 1 times negative 1. This is just going to be negative 1. So no matter what odd number you have as the exponent, it's always going to be negative. So the result is negative. Now for part B, we want to have n is even. So we can pick our favorite even number, n equals 2. So then g of x becomes x squared. And if I plug in x equals 1, that's 1 squared, which is 1. And if I plug in g of negative 1, that's the whole thing, negative 1 being squared. Okay, so this is very important here. The square is both on the negative and the 1, which is 1. Right? This is the same thing as saying negative 1 times negative 1, which is positive 1. So if I have a positive number, raise it to an even number, this is going to be positive because you're just multiplying positive numbers. Whenever you multiply positive numbers, you're always going to get a positive result. But let's say if you have a positive times odd, a negative times odd, negative to the even power, that's what I meant. Here, you're going to be multiplying a negative number an even number of times. So whether you multiply a negative number twice or 4 times, 2 negatives will cancel and become positive. Okay. So think of it like there are n negatives. So that means we can pair them up into n over 2 groups. So it'd be n over 2 negatives times n over 2 negatives, which they'll end up canceling out and you'll get a positive number. So these are the general formulas that this is testing. But if you don't have this memorized, you can just plug in your favorite odd and even number to get to the answer. So with that said, f of 1 we said is 1, f of negative 1 is negative 1, g of 1 is 1, g of negative 1 is also 1. And those are our answers.